Light fog curled around our feet, barely hiding us from the dead that loomed around aimlessly. In the corner of my vision, I made out a dark figure whose hand found its way out of the gray and onto Lily's shoulder, causing a short scream to rip from her throat as it dragged her down. At first, the panic of the attack had caused my heart to quicken, but then my eye caught a glint of metal. "No!" I shouted frantically as she fired off the gun multiple times. Craig and I gave her a stunned stare as she stood up quickly, her whole body shaking as she barely held onto the gun. She looked at us with wide eyes and a slightly parted mouth, realizing the enormity of her decision. My boots slightly slipped on the damp grass as I walked over to her and grabbed the gun from her grip, the metal cold and heavy in my hand. Mithum flicked the safety on, and I slid it in between the waistband of my jeans, making sure it was secure. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her eyes flickering between the gun and me. I panicked and I didn't know what else to do." A loud crunch sounded out, breaking the silence that ensued after she spoke. I could feel the resentment crawling off of Lucas, Lily's older brother, as he ripped his axe from the head of a dead body that was half-eaten with hands outstretched onto the dirt. "Don't you know what you've done?" Lucas asked, spitting onto the dead body he had just butchered and starting toward his sister. Craig rushed in front of him, pushing his hand into his chest. Lucas didn't even look at him. He just held Lily's bright blue eyes in his crosshairs. "You've just attracted all the snappers in a 2-mile radius. There's bound to be a horde of them. We're in the middle of the most populated suburb in—" "I said I'm sorry," she yelled, cutting him off and looking from me to him for assistance. "I just wanted it off me, okay? I don't even know how to use one of those gun things." "Lease, snappers!" I shouted, making sure to cut Lily off as I spotted a cluster of dark figures appearing through the fog on the horizon. My eyes opened wide. There was more than a cluster. There was an all-out swarm. We were undoubtedly getting overrun for the second time in 2 days since the apartment fell. And this time the odds of making it out of this wasn't good without the coverage that the building held. My eyes found Craig, the panic evident. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and plunged a hunting knife into the forehead of one that was getting closer to us. But it was clear that attempting to take them all down would be futile. "Go!" Craig bellowed as he struggled to pull the knife from the forehead of a snapper, backing up as it finally fell. Lucas started ahead of us, but it was clear that he had no idea where to go, as figures appeared out of nowhere. The gunshot had truly riled up all the snappers in the area. There were the lockups that had been left in the house by loved ones shopping for a cure, the roamers that walked the streets night and day, and then there were occupants, the ones that were doing their jobs when they got infected. All of them were heading to the gunshot that just served as the dinner bell. Not only did that hinder us, but we were tired, weak, covered in the blood of the dead and those we had recently lost, and running around in an unfamiliar park. "Where do we go?" I asked, my free hand clutching onto Craig's arm and stopping him. We both surveyed the area frantically, panic creeping in as we realized that there was nowhere left to run. "Shit," Craig muttered, trying to catch his breath. His hand gripped onto mine, trying to steady them as they were shaking uncontrollably. He avoided eye contact with me as he spoke. "Don't worry, Lease. We're going to get out of here. It's going to be okay. We're making it out of here alive. I promise." Empty promises. He knew that. We all knew that. Lucas let out an audible sigh. "Craig," I said, shaking my head and swallowing the edge I could feel myself slipping off of. "I don't know if that's going to happen." He looked at me now, realizing that I wasn't buying what he was trying to sell me this time. Usually when he told me it was okay, I'd just nod my head and agree. Now, it was beginning to seem clearer and clearer that safety was not the case. His hand brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. "We got to try," he replied, squeezing my hand. "Okay? We can't stop trying. That's not an option." "There are no more options, Craig," Lucas shouted at him, his eyes rabid. "And there's nowhere left to run. Nowhere." "We'll fight our way out then," Craig yelled back at him. The snappers were closing in on us, too many of them to count. Most of them came out of nowhere, like they always did. They were getting closer, but Lily just stood there with her hunting knife in her sheath around her waist, her small form shaking violently as her body racked with sobs. All I could think was that this was my entire fault. Had she finished her sentence before I saw the snappers and cut her off, she would have said that I had been the one to give her the gun. Last night, she wouldn't sleep and started crying. Lucas was being too much of a hard-ass to realize that his sister was traumatized. So I gave her my gun and told her that it would protect her. It made her feel safe. I should have known, though. Never give a gun to someone that runs on fear. "Okay," I said, looking away from Craig and to Lucas. We can't just die. We have to do something, even if it's running into them. I know there's a decent amount over there, but let's head over towards that playground and see if we can make it to the street. The playground might offer some coverage to shield us from the snappers. If we can make it to the street and get in a car, I can hotwire it. All we have to do is pray that there's gas in it. Let's go. I ran towards the first set of snappers next to the playground and swung at them with my machete. I'll just cut off their heads. I didn't bother to fully kill them and put the blade through their brain. Craig followed closely behind me, taking out any snappers that came from nowhere. Lucas followed behind him, acting as his coverage. Thankfully, once we got to the playground, there weren't any children. The equipment made for better protection than I had thought. In fact, we made it out of the playground in record time. All we had now was a straight shot to the street, where several cars lay scattered on the asphalt. We're going to make it, I thought to myself. We were almost there, so close I could almost taste it. Then Lily screamed. "Help!" she yelled out as a snapper bit into her arm, ripping out the veins as it pulled away. Blood poured out for the injury, and she managed to kick it off of her for a second. Then, as she scrambled away, she tripped on her feet and fell back. Moments later, she was on the ground, and more snappers started grabbing onto her and digging their teeth in, revealing spots of bone and organs. I stopped cold, and something flashed by my peripheral vision. It only took me seconds to realize that Lucas was running over to her. Craig looked at me for a split second before he took off after Lucas. "Craig!" I screamed as I started after him. It was too late to get to Lucas. He was already on top of the snappers trying to get to Lily, who was no longer screaming. If Craig reached him, he was a goner. "Stop!" Craig was almost to him, and I was almost to Craig. "Stop!" I yelled after him again, my voice nearly hoarse. This time he did stop, though, watching with horror the scene unfolding before him. I stopped to a slow and looked around him to see what he saw. A snapper sunk its teeth into Lucas's cheek, ripping it clean off and revealing the facial muscles and the white of his skull. Another snapper clamped their jaw onto his neck, ripping his throat out so we couldn't even hear him scream. A sharp pang twisted in my chest, but I forced myself to look away and focused back to Craig. He was about 50 yards in front of me. I started running toward him, but it wasn't until I was 20 yards away that I noticed the snapper lunging at him. "Look out!" I ran as fast as I could to him, and I took my machete and rammed the phase blade in between the snapper's eyes, slicing its head clean in half. It was a second too late, though. Craig clutched his hand close to him and looked at me with pleading eyes. He knew what I'd have to do. "Get on the ground and lay your hand out," I demanded. We'd have only seconds before the snappers started coming back over to us after they finished with Lucas. He shook his head. "God damn it, Craig. Just do it." He got on the ground and laid his hand out on the dirt, doing as I said. He realized we had no time for argument, and that now was the only time to get rid of the infection, because the alternative traveled fast in both shapes and forms. My left hand pressed down on his forearm, and I pulled up my machete with my right. My stomach lurched as I brought the blade down on his wrist as hard as I could. It didn't cut through. Blood spurted out, coloring my cheek, and I realized that I'd have to hit it a few more times to get through the bone. Craig squirmed, digging his other hand into the grass. His eyes watered us. His breathing turned thick. It was clear that the struggle not to scream was taking everything out of him as I hacked through his bone, frantic toe-tree, and make a clean cut between the fawn, all of the blood gushing out like a roaring river. His body was shaking violently as I finally broke through. A few snapper shads started toward us, abandoning the remnants of Lucas and Lily. My heart ached for them. Couldn't afford to lose focus. I threw Craig's shand at the snappers, trying to distract them as I wrapped my fingers around Craig's arm and pulled him up. I looked from the bloody stump that Craig held tightly to his chest and to the sedan that lay just across a patch of grass. Before Lucas ran after Lily, there were no snappers, but now a few stragglers had come in between us. We'd have to take care of them and do it fast, because the snappers that were tearing whatever was left of Lucas were about to come to us for dessert. "Stay close to me," I muttered to Craig as he tried to stop what was left off his wrist from bleeding. He was losing blood and could get a blood infection, or worse, the infection from the bite could turn him. I'd have to get him cleaned up as soon as we got out of here. I moved quickly toward the lingering snappers in between us and the car, using whatever energy I could muster to kill them for the final time. Once we were to the car, my eyes darted to the back seat. Seeing no threats, I slid into the front seat and checked the gas gauge. A sigh of relief escaped my lips as I saw that there was a few miles left in the car. Without skipping a beat, I started tampering with the wires as Craig got into the passenger seat. "Come on," I muttered impatiently, putting the necessary wires together. After a few times, it sparked, and the engine came to life. It slammed my car door shut and rammed my foot onto the gas pedal. We drove out of there as snappers trailed behind us, slowly fading out of view. After a few miles, car to get a better look at Craig's wound. Since I cut off the bite, probably be a day or two to see if the infection spread and he'd turn. My knuckles went white as I gripped the steering wheel. I couldn't lose Craig. If I lost him, I would have no one. Too many people had already been lost, just Lily and Lucas. There were others when I first found his group, and every single one had passed away. It was almost always from the same reason: infection. Craig looked at me with intense eyes, black hair disheveled as it clung to his forehead. I noticed that it looked even darker now on his pale, sweaty face. He moved to bring his good hand up to wipe his face, but as soon as he noticed how bad they were beginning to shake, head dropped it. "What do we do now?" he asked me, his voice cracking as he broke the comment. Silence. His voice sounded more vulnerable than I'd ever heard from him. I glanced over and noticed that his eyes were almost glossy. "We find stuff to clean up your wound. We find a place that's safe. And then," I said, pausing and looking down at the bloody stump that used to be his left hand. "Then we wait." He started with a shaky voice. "If I don't make—" "Don't say that," I cut him off. "We can't think or talk like that. I'm not losing you. We've lost too many today." "Lease," he said, pausing for a few minutes as we held each other's stare. We were both thinking of Lucas and Lily. Lucas was Craig's best friend before everything went down. They stuck together since the start. I was with different people when the virus hit and hell broke loose. It was 3 months since day one when I saw them outside my building had secured by myself. I helped their group and brought them in. It was only yesterday that it had been overrun and we'd lost everyone except for the 4 of us. Tears stained his pale cheeks as he shook his head and directed his gaze out the window. Whether he was crying from the pain of his hand or from losing his best friend, I didn't know, nor care, because both were valid excuses. Okay. I started the car again and we drove into some suburbs that would lead us into town. There would undoubtedly be a large amount of snappers there, but if I didn't attract attention, it would be safe. My mind wandered to places I could go to leave Craig. Taking him with me would slow me down, but I was nervous about leaving him like this alone. Ultimately, I didn't think I'd have a choice. Before I could leave him anywhere, however, I'd need to burn the wound. It still hasn't let up bleeding, and this was the only way I knew how to stop it. Turning the wheel, I found a mostly abandoned block and pulled up to an old-looking house at the end of it. "Stay here," I commanded, opening my car door and hoping out. I knew he'd want to argue, but he was too weak to do anything at this point. Besides, Elle just had to inspect the house to make sure it was safe. Then, I'd bring him in, and I'd cauterize the wound. As I walked up the steps and opened the front door, I noticed there were a few bloodstains on the floor, but nothing major was out of place. It was one level, so it wouldn't take long to search. Everything was clear, until I glanced down the hall toward the bathroom. As my boots screeched on the hardwood floors, a soft moan pricked my ears. My muscles tensed as I held my machete ready to strike. Something stuck on the bottom of my boot as I nudged the door open. Dried blood. Pushing the door open and moving back quickly, my shoulders relaxed as the snapper came into view. It was barely flesh and bones, held down by a fallen shower rod. For a second, I watched it as it weakly moved its head toward me, snapping its jaws relentlessly. Squeezing the machete, I dug the blade right through its open mouth, twisting it until the life once again drained from its eyes. Once it was dead, I didn't look back at T to see if it were a resident of the house or a random. I didn't want to know. If I did, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Not that I ever did. Focus, Lease. I opened the medicine cabinet and took out some alcohol and some gauze. My eyes scanned for anything else I could use, but I came up short. I moved toward the door, but against my better judgment, my eyes found the lifeless body of the snapper again. I swallowed hard, an apology on my lips, as I forced myself to shut the door, walking back toward the kitchen. I set the alcohol and gauze on the counter and looked around, my eyes staying on a door. I had checked the whole house, except the basement, and I didn't plan on checking it. Bloody handprints decorated the wood, and there wouldn't be much light down there, giving whatever was down there an advantage. Dragging a chair and putting it up to the doorknob, I looked it over. This would be secure. Now all I had to do, bring Craig in. Heading outside back to the car, I opened Craig's door and wrapped my arm around his torso to pick him up. He leaned all his body weight against me, and I almost fell over trying to support it. His body was too weak to stand on his own at this rate. He was running low on blood and time. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't good. If he needed blood, I'd have to go into a hospital, which isn't exactly the best place to go to in an apocalypse. In fact, it was downright suicidal. But if I wanted to save Craig, I'd have to go. My options were limited, and I'd have to make the choice. Once I made that choice, I'd have to live with it too. Lease. Craig groaned as I brought him into the kitchen. setting him lightly in a chair and leaning him against the table. He was beginning to lose consciousness. I slapped his face lightly to keep him awake before he turned toward the stove. My cold fingers turned the knob, bringing it to life. Then, I pulled a Zippo lighter out of my back pocket, thankful that I had swiped it off of Ron before he died a few weeks ago. Carefully, it turned the gas on the stove and ignited the fire. Glancing at Craig every few seconds, I flung open cabinets, searching for some sort of metal material. Luckily, I found a stainless steel pan within seconds. Holding it firmly, I poured the bottle of alcohol over it and took a rag to rub it in. Once it was dry and sterilized, I heated it, taking it off the flames before it turned orange. After everything was ready, I headed over to him with the pan. He stared at the metal with a cold gaze. Ignoring his protests, I put some cloth in his mouth for him to bite down on. My hands clutched his forearm, getting ready for what I was about to do. I hesitated for a second, looking away from his pleading eyes and trying to ignore his muffled yelling. With a deep breath, I pushed the metal on his skin, taking it on and off in 2-second bursts. It let out a sizzling noise once it touched the tissue, but you couldn't hear it over his screams, even with the cloth in his mouth. After I finished, I put the pan on the counter and sat down. "It's going to be okay, Craig," I said soothingly, running my fingers through his hair. He was almost asleep, his eyelids half closed as he looked at me, exhausted from what just happened. "Listen to me, okay? I need to know if you know your blood type. It's important." B. He breathed the fight in his voice gone. "Look, Lease, don't try and talk." He could not afford to waste energy. "You can talk when you wake up." "No," he started, trying to put all his energy towards speaking. "Don't risk your life. Please, stay safe. I want." Shh, I whispered as he trailed off, finally passing out. My eyes moved toward the window. It was around noon. I had a few hours till sundown. That would be enough time to make it to the hospital and back. I admit the idea left an uncomfortable feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't want to go to the hospital and risk my life to a place filled with snappers, but I had to. Without him, I had nothing left to lose. And I knew deep in my soul that I couldn't live with myself if I were responsible for his death, too. My eyes examined Craig's pale body slumped on the table. I knew I'd have to leave him here. He'd be too weak to bring into the car. Besides, he'd have better coverage if I barricaded him in a room versus a car full of windows for anything to look in. Place seemed like a safe bet. I shook my head. No place is safe, only safer. Even though an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach about this. Couldn't take him with me. If he did turn and I got in the car, he could attack me on the spot. If he turned here, I'd have a better chance. He wouldn't turn, though, I told myself adamantly. Deep down, no matter how many times I told myself that, there was a chance he wouldn't make it. The infection could have spread faster than I thought, and even if he wasn't infected, he's lost a lot of blood. Overall, this definitely wasn't looking good for him. I took a deep breath and put my arm around him. Using my upper body strength, I lifted him up and dragged him to a bedroom. I didn't even realize which one I let him into until I was in the doorway. It was a kid's room. I paused before entering. I thought of what could and probably happen to this kid. The questions of the possibilities and the realities overwhelmed me, aiding to the growing anger that bubbled right below the surface. I hated how this world was. I hated what happened. I hated the pandemic. I wanted to go back to how it used to be, where I could be with my friends or doing my homework. Instead, I'm killing infected human-eating monsters and trying to save my best and now only friend. I've lost everything. If I lose Craig, I don't know what I would do. He's the only reason I'm still here. Holding back a rush of angry tears, I set him on the bed and slid the covers over his shoulders. I looked down at him and brushed the back of my hand across his forehead. It was ice cold. "It'll all be okay, Craig." I leaned forward and whispered in his ear. Brushed his forehead, and I walked out of the room, leaving his pale, cold body behind.